Okay, that was fun. So the graph that you're looking at in front of us, analyze it, is showing us about pork bellies. The quantity of pork bellies that we are looking at is represented in thousands of pounds. Right? So you've got anywhere from 0 to 8,000 pounds on the horizontal axis of this graph. And then the vertical is representing the price per pound for pork bellies. If you've ever had a pork belly sandwich, you'd find pork belly is very similar to bacon, like really thick, long strips of bacon. I've had them at the Twins games, back when you could go to Twins games. In this diagram, then, as you look at it, you can see your demand curve just shows that as the price gets less expensive for pork bellies, more and more are going to get purchased. And the demand curve showing, or the supply curve, sorry, is showing us as the price goes up, the amount of pork bellies being supplied will increase. Those are laws of supply and demand that we've covered before. The question that we're being asked in this activity is just to do some reading on this graph, and can we determine, when we read the graph, what's the quantity demanded and quantity supplied at these different price levels? So the price levels we're looking at are 12, 10, 8, 6, and 4. So let's start with $12. What's the quantity demanded and quantity supplied at $12? Well, start at 12. And what we want to do is we read across until we hit a curve. And the first curve we hit is the demand curve. So then at that point, we go down and we can read that at $12 per pound, 2,000 pounds of pork bellies is what's going to be, people will be willing and able to purchase. So 2,000 is our number there. And then when we continue along at $12 and get to the supply curve, we find that the quantity supplied is going to be 6,000. So at such a high price, producers are going to be willing and able to put more on the market, but the buyers won't be willing to buy that quantity. So what's left over, and this was talked about in the Mr. Clifford video, is what we call a surplus. The difference between how much is going to be supplied and how much is going to be purchased, that's known as the surplus. So any price that is over where the two meet, any price that's above $8 is going to produce a surplus because it'll be somewhere in there. If the price were to be even higher than $12, the surplus would be even larger. So we had a surplus of 4,000. Now, when we go to $10, right, when we hit the demand curve, when we go to $10, well, 3,000. So as the price is dropping, the quantity demanded is rising. And we cross the supply curve at 5,000. So as the price drops, the quantity supplied is going to drop. And so we can continue to do this all the way through. If we go to 8, I guess I'll highlight that one. I'll notice this is where X marks the spot. So where demand and supply are the same. This is what we call equilibrium. This is ideally where prices in a free market are going to go to. We know that there are going to be events that are occurring all the time in a market, right? Things are going to be causing our demand for goods to shift. Things are going to be causing cost to produce for suppliers to change. So these curves that we see, the demand supply curves in real time, if we watched it over like a 24-hour span, you'd see all sorts of fluctuation left and right as they move. And so it'd be really hard, it'd be interesting, but it'd be hard to measure. So when we look at these graphs, we're looking at a snapshot of a market. We're freezing it in time and seeing where it's at. So equilibrium is 4,000 for both the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. And those of you that are good at detecting patterns, you can already see the pattern here, right? The quantity demanded as we continue to go down is going to get larger. The quantity supplied as we go down, the price drops is going to get smaller. So at $6, We now are crossing the supply curve first, and 3,000 are going to be supplied, 3,000 pounds, that is. And then 5,000 are going to be demanded. So there's going to be more demand now than there is supply. So now we have a different scenario. Whereas prices that are above equilibrium cause a surplus, prices that are below equilibrium cause a shortage. There are 2,000 more pounds of pork bellies that are being demanded than what will be supplied in the market. So some of the people that are willing and able to buy it for that price of $6 aren't going to be able to get it. Therefore, that's why it's a shortage. The last price there at $4, we crossed the supply curve first at 2,000, and then we crossed the demand curve at 6,000. So 2,000 quantity supplied, 6,000 demanded at that low price, shortage of 4,000. So now the second question that we're asked is, what's the equilibrium price and quantity in this market? Well, we determined it's where the quantity demanded and quantity supplied is the same. So it is at $8 per pound, and the quantity is 4,000. That's the market price, market quantity, or equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. Economists will use the term equilibrium quantity and market quantity interchangeably, much like other things that we've experienced, right? Economists tend to have multiple terms for the same concept. So given the price of $8 and the quantity of 4,000, the total amount of money that's earned by the pork belly sellers, or their total revenue, is going to be the amount of pounds times the price per pound. So 8 times 4,000. Can you hear my cat scratching right now, or is that not loud enough? He's scratching her post, which is about 8 feet away from me. $32,000 is the total revenue, the total amount of money that will be brought back in by the pork belly sellers, which covers their costs then, so they can continue to stay in business and operate. Would the pork belly producers like that price to be higher? Absolutely, because then it would help them generate a profit. So an example of a price that would result in a surplus is, again, anything that is going to be above equilibrium. So any price up in here would work. So you could go 10, 12, 14. We'll just go 12, between 10 and 14. And the amount of the surplus at that price then is asking, what's the difference between the supply and the demand? So at $12, we already have this written down too. It's 6,000 supplied, 2,000 demanded. 6,000 minus 2,000 is going to give us 4,000. So the surplus is 4,000 unpurchased pounds of pork bellies. The last question that we're asked is, what would happen in the market if the price were $4 per pound, and then how would that affect the price? Well, if it was $4 per pound, what we can see is there'd be a lot demanded, right? 6,000 pounds would be demanded, only 2,000 would be made available. And so there'd be a lot of people that would want to buy them that aren't going to get them. So they'll bid up the price. We would expect the price of pork bellies to rise, and they would continue to rise until they got to equilibrium. Now, at this moment, equilibrium is $8, but remember, there are events that are occurring over time that may cause the market to shift. And so maybe by the time the price rises up to equilibrium, maybe equilibrium's at $10. Or maybe there's something that causes equilibrium to be lower. It depends on the events that occur. But this first activity is just helping us read the graph, and most importantly, discovering where equilibrium is, because that's what you want to zero in on, is where does X meet the spot, or X mark the spot. I guess I can do activity. Yeah, I'll do activity 4 with you, because we've talked about demand and supply, and I'll probably zoom through demand and supply in the pages after this. So this is a pretty important activity, I think, because it brings together the concepts that we looked at so far. Shown below in graph A, B, C, and D, we have the 4 different types of shifts that can occur. You've got in graph A and B, these are supply shifts. So graph A is showing an increase in supply because it's shifting to the right. Graph B is showing a decrease in supply because it's shifting to the left. Graph C and D are showing shifts in demand, what can happen in the market. And so graph C is a increase in demand. That's what it's showing. And graph D is showing a decrease in demand. The reason I say this is important is that 4 of the questions on your level 2 exit are going to be asking you, can you graph an increase or a decrease in demand or supply, and then tell us what's going to happen to the price of quantity after that shift occurs. So really zeroing in on these graphs and being able to recreate a shift is an important piece of what you'll need to do on that exit ticket. The other portion of what you're asked on the test, or the 5th question, is going to be, can you demonstrate how other markets can affect a market that we're looking at? So these questions that we're given here are going to ask us, well, the primary market is, all right, we're focusing on the market for that product. But then we want to see, how does a shift in that market change markets that are related to it, but other markets? So we're going to start with a pest infestation kills a large number of orange trees. And the question we want to ask ourselves is, does that event directly affect the buyers of oranges or the sellers of oranges? And the fact that we're dealing with the orange trees should indicate that, yeah, we're talking about the sellers, right? The sellers have to plant the trees, they have to grow the oranges, and that is a vital component of their business, right? It's a resource. So the pest infestation killing their trees is going to affect the supply of oranges. It's going to decrease the supply of oranges. So we are going to zero in then on, use yellow highlighter now, just to differentiate. We're going to focus on this graph here. The supply is decreasing, so this is the new curve, right? S1. So the original curve is just S. So S1 shows the new one. Yeah. So graph B is what we want to circle or indicate for that one. That's, I'm just going to put a dot over it, kind of like an election ballot, so we know. The question is, now we got to think. In other markets, how is that going to affect the market for orange juice, right? Is it going to affect the market for orange juice? Well, it's not going to affect the buyers or the demand for orange juice, the fact that the orange trees have been killed and decrease the supply. Orange juice producers obviously need to buy oranges, right? Because oranges are a resource in making orange juice. What we can see when we look at this graph, and zoom in on it a little bit for you, is that we've got our old equilibrium price and quantity for oranges would have been there before the pest infestation. After we had that and there was a shift in supply, the new equilibrium is here. So the price went from what was at one point here to there. And we don't need to know numbers. It doesn't matter what the number is. We just know that it went up. So price is going to go up. And the quantity of oranges, originally here, the new quantity of oranges in the market there, the price is going down. So if we know that the price of oranges is going up and it's going to affect producers of orange juice because it's going to be more expensive to buy their oranges, that is one of those shifters for supply where it's a change in the price of resources. And so I got that from the list of shifters that were shared with you last time we met. So we're going to see a decrease in supply in orange juice as well, because it's one of the shifters of supply. So key for that one. Now, when you look at the grapefruit market in this event, It doesn't say that the pest infestation kills grapefruit trees. It doesn't affect the grapefruit producers directly, right? They're still continuing to produce grapefruit at the same cost that they did before. But what that might do is it's probably going to cause the buyers of oranges to substitute their preference for fruit, for citrus fruit. So they will likely increase the demand for grapefruits because oranges get more expensive. Shift your demand over to the grapefruits, which probably haven't changed in price at all. And so there, you're looking at graph C, which is showing an increase in demand. So there's some of my markings here. We'll do one more of these. Let's see. I am going to do the last one. Drinking hot chocolate becomes a worldwide fad. So when that happens, the way that it affects the market, it becomes a worldwide fad. That is an instance that is affecting the buyers and not the sellers, right? The fact that it becomes a fad doesn't change the cost to produce hot chocolate at all. It changes the people's willingness and ability to pay for it. So in that respect, we'd be looking at becoming more popular. It's going to increase the demand. And look at how does that affect the curve. The demand curves originally got just the letter D by it. The increase in demand shifts the curve to the right, so your new demand is here. The old price for hot chocolate has changed. It's gone up. The quantity of hot chocolate in the market would be changing and also going up. So price goes up, quantity goes up. We are looking at graph C here. And then we got to think about how does that affect the market for cocoa? Well, producers of hot chocolate need to buy cocoa in order to make their product. So we're going to see that there is going to be a change in the demand for cocoa from the sellers. So they're still purchasers, they're still buyers. So we would see an increase in demand for cocoa as well. And with chocolate bars, we're probably looking at a shift in what people are going to buy. They're going to buy hot chocolate rather than chocolate bars as a result of this. So some of the money that they normally might have spent on chocolate bars are going to be shifted over, substituted to the hot chocolate. So we're looking at a decrease in demand for chocolate bars. In answering this question, suppose events were happening that increased both the demand and supply of a commodity or a good. Explain how this could lead to a rise, a fall, or no change in the equilibrium price of the quantity. So what they're saying is there's multiple things happening at once. It causes demand and supply curves to shift. How do we know what's going to happen to the price of the quantity? That depends entirely upon the effect, the extent of which each event causes the curve to shift. We are going to be measuring how far curves shift to the left or shift to the right. So what we do know is it's just indeterminate unless we get more information. We would have to know exactly how far supply or demand curve shifted, both of them in fact, before we can determine what happens to the price of the quantity. What I will show you here with activity 2 is that one of the nice things is that it gives you the shifters of demand, right? It rephrases it in a way that just shows you that when there's a change in the buyer's taste or a change in their income or wealth or a change in the price of substitutes and complements or future expectations, those can cause demand curves to shift. as does the change of the number of buyers in the market. Okay, so physically, the number of people that are able to buy them, that are physically there to buy them, changes. And then in this activity 3, which you don't have to do, I would just simply use this as a reference. These are the 5 shifters for supply. A change in the number of sellers in the market, a change in how they produce their product. Either if it's easier to produce and less costly, increase the supply. If it becomes more expensive, it's decrease it. The price of resources to make it, government policies, or future expectations. So I tried to present those to you in several different ways. The shifters, I've given you Mr. Clifford's videos, and you could scrub through those and take screenshots of where the shifters are if that helps you. You could use the slide that I created in some tutorials that have the shifters listed on it. You have access to them here as well. This last slide can, I think, help you in some ways as you're looking at an event and trying to think your way through what is this event going to do to a market. So it's just a flow chart that you can follow. So for example, we're given an event in a market. Say we can go back to the pests, the orange market. The first thing you should do after you're given that event is ask yourself, is it changing the number of buyers? In the case of oranges, with the trees getting killed, we knew it wasn't going to change the number of buyers of oranges in the market. The people weren't coming or going as a result of that event. So it also didn't change the buyers' values. It did change the cost sellers to produce them. It didn't change the number of sellers. It might, in the end, it might cause some of those sellers to go out of business, but we don't know that yet. We can't make that leap and decide that's what's going to happen. We could predict it might, but the only thing it does for certain is that it changes the costs to produce those oranges. So then, once we determine that, we can have either the increase in the cost to produce them or a decrease. Well, when the trees got destroyed, that means they're going to have to buy more trees and grow them, again. So that was going to increase the cost to produce oranges. So you can follow this arrow down, and it shows you, the graph's going to look like this. You've got a decrease in supply. Right, so the curve is going to end up shifting to the left, so it's a decrease in supply. And the other piece that I really like for students in this particular flow chart is that then it shows you what's going to happen to the price and the quantity. Now, some students actually use this chart in reverse. Like when you're given an event like that, some students intuitively can figure out, well, when, let's say the chocolate bar example, when chocolate, or hot chocolate was, right? When hot chocolate becomes more popular, we know that the price of hot chocolate is probably going to go up and the amount of hot chocolate in the market's going to go up, right? But then they're like, I'm not sure which graph that is. Well, if you think that you know what's going to happen to the price and quantity of something, but you're struggling with the graph, start at the bottom, right? Price and quantity going up, and you can work it backwards and say, oh yeah, that's going to, when the price and quantity goes up, that's going to lead to an increase in demand, right? Or that is an example of an increase in demand, where the curve shifts to the right. So this chart, if you choose to utilize it, can be used both forwards and backwards. And depending upon how your brain works and analyzes these scenarios, you can work through it from top to bottom, or you can go in reverse, go bottom to top. So wanted to give you something that would help you think your way through it. And this last piece is just practice for you. The practice from this here, activity 2.1, is actually utilizing the chart. So you can see step 1 is this portion of the chart. Step 2 incorporates this portion of the chart. And then step 3 incorporates this last portion of the chart. And so that directly translates to here. Right? You got step 3 here. I think it was orange that I used, was step 2, and then we had use yellow on step 1. What it asks you to do in step 1, I'll do one example. Instead of pests destroying orange trees in Florida, now we got a freeze destroying them. we determined, right, we went back up here and I was talking through it and said it changes the cost of the sellers. That's step one. So I was just going to put a little check mark there, changing the cost of the seller. So all that is requiring you to check one of those 4 lines. Step 2 says draw the change in supply or demand depending upon what you chose in step 1. So in step 2, right, I went here and I went down, right, because I said it increased the cost. So I'm going to be graphing a decrease in supply. So I got to draw an arrow to the left and a new curve. So arrow to the left, new curve. That's what it's going to look like. And then it asks, what's the change in equilibrium price and quantity? So what's going to happen to the price? What's going to happen to the quantity? You could just simply go back up to the chart, follow that down, see, oh yeah, price is going to go up, quantity is going to go down, which is true. Visually, for those of you that like to see it on the graph, the price, right, the old price is here, the new price is there, so the price went up. The old quantity is here, the new quantity is here, the quantity went down. So the price goes up, quantity goes down. These other ones just provide you some practice at doing that. I'm not going to be grading or asking you to turn anything off of what we've covered on this file in. Just know that your 4 of your 5 questions on the exit ticket ask you to basically do what's on this page here, which is graph a shift and then indicate what's going to happen to the price and the quantity. You're going to go up or down. And then the 5th question actually goes back to what we did here, and it's can you show that you understand that what happens in one market can affect a different market? I'll be giving you a specific event, and you just have to tell me what's going to happen in a different market as a result of that. Probably is going to be one of the examples that appears in here, though, so it wouldn't be an event that's unfamiliar to you. Does anybody have any questions about what I just covered there? That was a lot.